Man is the only known creature that can contemplate his own future, can contemplate not only the years that lie ahead of him, but also can consider what lies beyond his present physical embodiment. Because he has this faculty, it was inevitable that early peoples should contemplate the problem of life after death. Originally, this problem rested squarely upon the clergy, or upon the priesthoods, or the medicine priests, or the shamans, who led the spiritual destiny of the people. Later, however, a certain structure of inquiry crept in. Many were no longer willing to simply accept on faith and faith alone. They had confidence in their religious leaders, but some way a conflict came about between the teachings of the religious and the daily experiences of human life. By degrees, therefore, the custodians of the doctrine of the afterlife changed estates. And from the priesthood, the tradition passed to the philosophical schools and the intellectual systems. The philosophical schools, of course, had their origins in the religious, and therefore, for the most part, followed along the general religious concepts. However, they tried to rationalize the doctrines of the clergies. They tried to prove intellectually, rationally, reasonably, that the teaching of immortality was philosophically sound, that it could be defended as well as accepted. The moment, of course, you defend something, someone else is unhappy about it and assails your defense. While the belief was held largely by the priesthood, and the priesthood almost completely dominated the public mind, there was very little criticism or conflict in basic religious convictions. However, when the intellectual schools took over, there were certain disagreements among themselves, and a waiting public was not satisfied that the philosophers completely solved the problem. The philosophers seemed to make it more reasonable, but they did very little to the chronic doubter who continued to doubt and wanted some kind of physical evidence to support the religious and philosophical interpretations. This continued to be a problem for a long time and is still a problem in a great many personal lives and in a great many beliefs and schools. Finally, it came about that the newborn and rather precocious infant of the 17th century, science, became involved in the problem. Science was reluctant to take any part in the situation, on the ground that science dealt with things that were physical, obvious, and could be examined, placed under laboratory controls, and could become the basis of research theses for those looking for a doctorate. The result of this was that the physical, materialistic scientists rather preferred not to become involved. Privately, they might admit a belief, or they might deny any belief. But for the most part, the scientist took an agnostic position. He did not deny the possibility, but he pronounced solemnly that no proof was available and in his own opinion, there would be no proof that would satisfy him that man could accumulate. Now, in the last 25 years, things have become somewhat more complicated in the personal life of the individual. He has become more interested in living. He also has become more interested in questioning the reasons for his own existence. It was easy in early times to say that all these things were locked in the will of heaven, that God alone knew why these things happened. Gradually, however, it became essential to the human mind that it began to understand why God did what he did. And out of this came questioning, and came a rising group of mystics and persons concerned with a new approach to trying to solve the problem. And that approach became closely associated with the rise of the psychological schools. Psychology seemed for a moment to be the open door into the world of the human mystery. Psychology, however, was largely academic, and most psychologists were as reluctant to discuss metaphysics as were the material scientists themselves. The psychologists did do considerable groundwork, but always it was dominated, at least publicly, by the patterns of academic procedure. Gradually, however, a new school has arisen among the scientific people. Younger men and women coming into the sciences, arising in medicine, in psychology, psychiatry, all of these counseling subjects. These people have become more and more vitally concerned with the problem of the true nature of the human being. And it has gradually come to be admitted that there is much evidence that the one life theory on which most modern world thinking has been established is simply not adequate. The only way you can justify it is to frustrate everything else. In order to justify the one life theory, you have to take the universe apart and throw the parts away. You cannot work into an intelligent concept of life. We cannot assume that the universe is meaningful, or that there is a pattern of purposes behind the various manifestations in astronomy, physics, biology, and related fields. So it has gradually become more popular to suspect that there is a larger invisible background to evolution than we have been inclined to accept. We are beginning to realize that the world is very much like the iceberg, that the greater part of it is under water and cannot be seen, that a greater part of our physical existence is invisible, and that we are simply living on the certain peaks of knowledge that rise above the surface of the ocean of the unknown. The unknown, however, must be important. There must be something there that explains the known, because even with the best scientific advancement, the known does not explain itself, nor does man find suitable, satisfactory, and solutional answers to the various mysteries of his own existence. So we have this type of problem, and we have inherited it from our forebears, and we probably will always be faced with it. In the Western world, we have assumed that there was a certain survival factor, and that factor was largely dominated by a theological concept of punishment and reward. The individual leaving this world went to a desert. He went to something that he had earned. He went to the judgment of his existence. If he had lived well, he had a fair chance of a benevolent condition in the afterlife. If he had lived miserably and been a cruel and dishonorable person, he would be subject to strange punishments, and all kinds of unpleasant diagrams, figures, paintings, etc., have been produced to indicate the condition of a soul in purgatory or perdition. This, however, was more or less a moral problem, and undoubtedly it frightened a number of generations into a state of conformity with prevailing opinions. We can't say that it increased virtue because of any great desire to be better. It increased virtue because of fear of punishment after death. Gradually, however, this has lost its flavor and has lost its impulse to condition human thinking. The average person today is not really heaven and hell conscious. He is not much interested in the thought, and down in the heart and soul of himself he does not believe that this doctrine is going to seriously affect him as a person. He is more apt to follow the idea that there is no life after death, and therefore all speculation is useless. He would rather be an atheist and believe in nothing than be a theist and believe in some of the things his ancestors accepted. It just did not seem to make sense. So now we have these new fields coming in. We have parapsychology. We have a tremendous increase in interest in psychic phenomena. We have more and more books being written every day reporting conditions of suspended animation and the probabilities of the survival of consciousness after death. These reports are met with a variety of reactions. Those who have always been of the idealistic mind simply smile and say, well, after 5,000 years, they've caught up with the facts we always accepted. Others still remain uncertain, and every book favoring life after death will somewhere along the line be faced with another book denying the premises in the one which has been previously issued. So the problem goes on, and there seems to be no really easy way to answer this question. Now, we also know that the average human being has certain faculties which he likes to use, and the divine power in its infinite wisdom has bestowed upon the individual a power of intuition. It has also given him the power to evolve, liberate, and develop mysterious, subtle powers, attitudes, and levels of consciousness locked within himself. And gradually a number of rather progressive thinkers have centered their attention upon the simple fact that the only way in which the average person can convince himself completely, beyond any question of doubt, and find the final evidence for the certainty of his own immortality is to search within himself for the instruments of this knowledge. He must finally discover that within his own nature are the instruments necessary to convince him of life after death. He will have to experience life after death ultimately. And in the meantime, he has powers to research his own inner life, to determine by means of the development of extrasensory gamut the conditions of life which he cannot see, and all of the research up to the present time that is carried on within enlightened individuals, for the most part, supports the idea of the continuity of human consciousness. Now, while the West was approaching all this in its normal manner, Western people have always been more or less objective, and they object easily to almost anything. they have never been able to agree on any particular premise. And another point that has been in their disfavor for a long time is the tremendous materialistic overambition of Western peoples. A Westerner, for the most part, is an individual trying to improve his physical condition. He wants more money, he wants more status, he wants all of the good things of life. And the good things of life have become more or less an obsession with him. He also has been a very aggressive creature. He is always out conquering somebody. And in the process of revolution and upheaval, he has developed certain fatalistic attitudes toward life. The Western person is not by nature inclined to be contemplative. He is not the type that sits under a tree and meditates upon the mysteries of life. He is an individual who cuts down the tree, pollutes the ground, and finally turns around and tries to find synthetic escapes for the mistakes that he has made. He is a plunderer of life, not a supporter of it. As a result of this, he is not very much inclined to contemplate optimistically, constructively, or idealistically the future of his own existence. He is faced with the same problem as every other corner of creation, yet he reacts to it quite differently from some other people. The reaction being largely dominated by his personal interests. The Western person is so tremendously dedicated to being himself that he mistakes his material structure for his real nature. Now, other nations are gradually catching on to this idea, and I think we can say with a considerable amount of regret that materialistic ambitions have been transferred to most other parts of the earth. Most nations now are in a great competition for material supremacy. They believe that they can achieve something or other by conquering each other. About all they have succeeded in doing to date, however, is to liberate souls in this world on the battlefield or by starvation into the invisible realms which the conquerors and the conquered do not believe in. This is a sad but unfortunately part of a pattern that we cannot get over. Actually, this situation brings into focus the Eastern equivalent of some of our beliefs. And I suppose that for simplicity, dignity, and directness of approach, and for understandability and integrity, it would be difficult to find any school or any teaching that has been more successful in this search and in this process than the great heart doctrine of Amida Buddhism. The Buddha Amida is the central figure of a very large group of Buddhists, both in Japan and China, and in other parts of the Far East, and some even in the West, who represents the personification of enlightened love. Amida never lived. He is an ideal figure. He is an archetype. They know this. They know also, however, that Amida signifies or symbolizes in a more or less concrete way the infinite life of the universe, manifesting through a combination of infinite wisdom and infinite love. In other words, Amida is space as love and wisdom. It is an eternal principle, a psychic energy permeating everything. It is the tremendous life principle which extends beyond the stars, beyond the galaxies, beyond anything that we know, and even in a mysterious way goes into the dark abysses of space and bestows upon them the blessing of the wisdom and love of reality. Amidism, therefore, is a belief founded in a very simple concept, namely that everything that exists is a manifestation of the infinite love of life for its own creatures. That also each creature is an embodiment of this life principle. That each individual is responsible for the use that he makes of this principle. That he is responsible for the use that he makes of life and of living things. For this reason, Amidism is a philosophy or a religion of harmlessness. It recognizes no merit in destruction of any kind. It accepts no vengeances, no revenges. It can condone no grudges or intemperances or intolerances of any kind, because all of these exist only where the being involved has not become aware that the universe itself exists upon a strange warp and woof of wisdom love, and that the two terms are interchangeable, that they are two names for the same thing. Wisdom is not separate from love. Love is not separate from wisdom. They are both manifestations of life itself in infinite, continuous manifestation. They represent this concept by a radiant figure, a figure that represents an evolvement of consciousness. Life in the process of growth is constantly producing superior types of things. Down through the ages, it has resulted in the great descent of evolutionary procedures. Life is forever excelling itself. And as in the story of the chambered nautilus, man, nature, the space around him, the universe, chaos, cosmos, are all in a case of constant growth. They are building nobler palaces and temples for their souls. Thus, everything is growth. And growth means that in the course of time, growth must result in things attaining a degree of superior growth. Growth is more than a physical situation. The individual is born, grows up, matures, grows old, and passes on. But this does not necessarily imply that he grows up. It only implies that he has moved through a period of time and has worn out the instrument with which he came into this world. The fact that he may leave almost as he entered is by no means unusual, and there is plenty of evidence, scientifically collectible, to the fact that the individual can, with care and thought and discrimination, can leave this world as foolish as when he came here. He can carefully avoid anything that might result in improvement for himself. He might be careful also not to perform any action that is sufficiently unselfish to be suitable to reward with some benefit. We have today narcotics problems. These problems affect people who are college graduates, successful in all walks of life, who simply do not care about trying to be any better than they are. And because of this, they are getting worse every day. We have the same with alcohol. The individual does not really care enough or believe enough about his own destiny to be concerned. He simply goes along and may very well leave as he entered, without very much growth or understanding or maturing of his own life. Other less flagrant problems simply represent self-interest, the individual living from day to day to do what he feels like, and gradually, unable to do the things that he has always wanted to do, he fades away. Now, this cannot be a proper interpretation of life by an intelligent creature. Man is born with a power within himself which, if he will use it, will enable him to make a much better judgment about his own conditions, the conditions of his world, and the purposes for both. As long as he is willing, however, to be ignorant, suffer the results of ignorance, and be miserable and unhappy in exchange for a few days, years of gratifications, he will be as he is. Now, in the doctrine of the Pure Land sect of Buddhism, we have the realization that has been bred into these people for thousands of years that life is important. Life is meaningful. We are here for a reason. We are here to fulfill a purpose, and that the real purpose is to grow rather than to accumulate. The real reason to be here is to become better, to make use of the opportunities of existence to enrich character and ennoble human relationships. If these factors are ignored, or even put in second position, the life is damaged, or is imperfect, or lacks full understanding of its own significance. The Pure Land, therefore, tells us very frankly that the individual must plan his own growth. That this growth is not something in which he can depend upon constant indoctrination by other people. Gautama Buddha, of course, who was the prime moving principle behind all Buddhism, observed on one occasion that I will not believe a doctrine because the scriptures say that it is true. I will not believe a doctrine because the great teachers have taught it. I will not believe a doctrine because my countrymen and those around me insist that it is true. I will not accept any of these things and blindly follow them. I will follow a belief or a doctrine only if in my own heart I am convinced that it is true. This is one of the problems we have. People are following doctrines and teachings which their own hearts have not yet found ways to interpret or understand. Therefore, Amidism is called the heart doctrine. It is the individual growing up heart first and recognizing what are called the Buddha seeds that are planted by eternal life in the heart of man. He must help these seeds of truth, realization, and integrity to grow by dedicated effort. If he does not do this, then the real purpose of life is lost. Amidism arose as what is called the Northern School, or the Great Doctrine. And the Great Doctrine is the teaching of the large path that leads to salvation. It is called the Mahayana School, and is separated from the Southern School, which is called the Hinayana, and is firmly set in Siam, or Thailand, and what is now Lanka, was Ceylon. These southern followers follow an ascetic life. They renounce all material things, and putting on the robe, wander into homelessness. In other words, to them, the life of truth is a monastic existence, a concept that also dominated Europe for many hundreds of years. The Mahayana, however, the large vehicle, says no. This is not the real answer. The real answer is not that the individual shall perform these types of austerities because they are recommended or told to him by his religion or his philosophy or by his various teachers. The real answer to the entire problem is not to walk out on your job. It is not part of the plan of things that a person seeking holiness shall leave his own family, neglect his children, go into bankruptcy, and become dependent upon welfare. This is not the religious life. This is a symbol, a very cheap symbol of poverty, used as an example of piety. That the individual who gives up wealth, gives up all, is simply based upon the mistaken point of view that for that individual wealth is all, when it is not the case. What the Mahayana school teaches the individual to do is to stay with his job, do the things that he knows he should be doing, serve his fellow man unselfishly and thoughtfully, and at the same time keep in his heart the mystery of salvation. In other words, the heart doctrine is one of the continuous remembering of the divine plan and its purpose for us. That this remembering goes into everything we do. It goes into the arts which we create. It goes into the labors we perform for common good. The carpenter builds a house, remembering the infinite love of Amida. The mother with the child cares for the child and gives her whole heart to it, really and sincerely, forgetting self, because in so doing she feels that she experiences immediately within herself the unselfish love of the Amida. So where unselfishness leads, Amida is present. Where selfishness leads, the rather unpleasant figure of the demon kings begin to arise. They are not the symbols of the pure doctrine. One of the simple symbols of Amidism is the symbol, what is called the symbol of the presence of the other. Every monk or priest or devout member of the Amida sects believes always that he walks and lives and thinks with another. There is this other person whom he cannot see, but who never leaves him and is constantly guiding, protecting, and guarding him, and constantly helping him to sustain his faith. This other is not, however, an imaginary being, dreamed up by his own need. This other is life itself, a life which is present everywhere, always, and protects all who serve it, and punishes all who damage it. That as long as the person lives according to the laws governing life, he is under the protection of the strongest virtue and the most magnificent principle that can possibly exist. Now, according to the Buddhist doctrine, of course, the concept of gods or deities is very different from what we have. This is why, in many instances, these people have been called idolaters. They are supposed to be worshiping graven images. Actually, this is not true. The concept is, however, that instead of a mysterious, eternal principle of theocracy governing all things, that everything is in a constant process of growth. The gods are growing along with creation. They are not sitting in judgment above the divine workmanship. They are part of it, because all of these deities are actually, of any nation or of any people, are actually merely manifestations of the radiant, creative, and redemptive energy of one power. Now, the Buddhist realizes that this one power has other names. He does not attempt to insist that it has to be called anything, but it has to be recognized that all of the leading powers, all the laws, all the forces that govern existence are servants of the purpose of existence itself, which is the perfection of all that lives. Therefore, the so-called demigods or deities are agencies by means of which the purposes of infinite enlightenment are being advanced. According to this doctrine, Buddha tells his disciples the story of the Buddha Amida, that once upon a time, aeons, millions of years ago, there was a mendicant, just like himself, a wanderer upon the face of the earth, searching for truth. And this wanderer passed through many, many embodiments and found more and more of the light that he needed and desired. And at last, after hundreds of lives, he attained to the condition of an arhat, or an enlightened servant of the law. And in this condition, he gradually performed more and more saintly works until it was finally his merit over millions of years to become a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva means an enlightened self. And when he came to this degree, he became embodied in great labors of philanthropy, great labors of service. He contributed to the good of all things in a strange and wonderful way, because he was gradually diffusing himself throughout life. He was no longer working for himself. He was not even working for life. Life was working through him to the fulfillment of its own purposes. And finally, in the great day, be with us, it is said, this being attained to the right of Buddhahood. And this right was the highest good to which the being could ascend and still exist as a being in a universe of conditioned existence. And when the time came for Amida to attain to Buddhahood, he then took the great vow. The vow being that he would not accept the fullness of his own labor. He would not pass on into the infinite love of Amida. He would not go into that great glory of perfection from which there is no return. He would not leave this world until, and then he made the vow that is important to our present subject. He said, I will not attain or accept liberation from the responsibilities of existence until I can take with me into the other land the smallest of all things, the tiniest gnat floating in a sunbeam. There shall be nothing so small that I will go into perfection without taking it with me. And as a reward for this vow, he was made the Lord Buddha of the Western Paradise, the paradise of Amitabha, which is nothing but his own heart. And in this heart is the radiance of salvation, a salvation that must, however, always be earned, a salvation which is like a schooling. It is not bestowed. Salvation is not something that can be handed to someone. It is not something that can be produced by miraculous means. It is not a fulfillment based upon what we would like or what we want or what we think we deserve. Actually, enlightenment is the condition of the internal realization that we are created for one purpose alone, and that is to advance the destinies of all that lives. So with this vow, Amida became the guardian of the Western Paradise. Now, we have not noticed many times in reading religious books and so forth that nearly always paradise is located in the West. We have a slang-like term that we use here, that when someone passes on, they go west. We are not certainly involving them in Buddhism, but it seems that always, in the Greek mythology, the Blessed Isles are to the west. The new Atlantis was to the west. The utopia was to the west. Always the blessed lands of perfection are to the west. And the ancients firmly believed that this Western Hemisphere was to be the blessed land. And certainly that was the teaching of Buddha, of Bacon, in his work, The New Atlantis. It was to the west. And it was a place where all good things would be done, and where human beings would live together in peace and happiness and wisdom. And as he puts it, that all knowledge should be for one purpose only, the accomplishment of the greatest good for the greatest number, without any implication of selfishness. So Amida, however, in the Western paradise, lives in a radiant world symbolically represented by the Taima Mandara in Japanese Buddhism. Here he is seated in